Hello, this is Michel Leviathan Sorbet, and this is a new episode of BoardGameGeek TV. Today I would like to invite you to watch a new video concerning one of the newest games released by Vuca Simulations. This will be a tutorial, a how to play video, during which I will be explaining how to play New Cold War. New Cold War is a new game from Vuca Simulations released in 2025, designed by Andoni Orive and Igor Plasa. The game is for 1 to 4 players. It is a game for players aged 14 or higher, and the time of play should be somewhere around 150-180 minutes. The game is set in the years 1989-2019, and it enables 1 to 4 players to simulate the so-called New Cold War, so the era between the dissolution of the Soviet Union and contemporary times, when 4 major global powers entered into a new type of rivalry. Those 2 major powers are the United States of America, Russia, China, and the European Union. During the game, the 4 factions, which will be divided into 2 blocks, firstly the US and the EU, and secondly China and Russia, will be trying to overcome their foes, will be trying to take control of different parts of the region, of the world. The game map will be divided into regions. In each region we will be having some countries which will be regional powers, which will be geostrategic countries, and countries of lesser importance, but still important when it comes to scoring. During the game, which will be up to 9 turns long, the players will be trying to take control of different parts of the world by establishing presence, by establishing control over parts of the board. They will be trying to score the maximum number of points during those 9 turns, also trying to accomplish their secret objectives. If during the game a player manages to accomplish 2 of their objectives up until turn 8, he is able to score an automatic victory. If this doesn't happen, the players will play a 9th final turn, and after this turn the winner will be determined depending on the number of gained victory points. Today in this video I would like to show you how New Cold War looks, and I would like to explain you how to set up the game, then what are the basic mechanisms of it. In the end I would like also to show you how the actions of the game work and what are the victory conditions. So, without further ado, let's now jump into this tutorial and let's take a look how New Cold War works. New Cold War is a game that takes place during the 30 years between the collapse of the Soviet Union and the onset of the COVID-19 health crisis. During the 3 decades, players will take on the roles of one of the 4 great powers, fighting for dominance in world geopolitics. They will be able to take control over China, Russia, the United States, and the European Union. Each power will be aligned with one another, because initially the confrontation will be between the red bloc, consisting of Russia and China, and the blue bloc, which will comprise the United States and the European Union. But each player has to prioritize their own strategy, because at the end of the game only one power can emerge victorious. The game therefore starts in cooperation between allied powers in the early stages, but then becomes entirely competitive as the moment of final victory approaches. The goal of New Cold War is obviously to win. This can be achieved in 2 ways. Firstly, by an automatic victory, secondly, by victory points. During a game of New Cold War, each player will have a certain number of objectives that he can fulfill. If such a player manages to fulfill 2 of their objectives by the end of turns 2 to 8, he instantly wins the game. Only 1 objective can be fulfilled per turn, and each objective can only be fulfilled once. If no player achieves automatic victory by the end of turn 8, the game ends at the end of turn 9. At this point, the player who has the most number of victory points wins, regardless of the number of fulfilled objectives. Players can still score objectives on turn 9, but only in order to gain new victory points. In the event of a tie, the winner will be determined as follows. Firstly, the player who is ahead on the prestige track wins. If there is still a tie, the player who is ahead on the media track wins. If there is still a tie, the players will be declared joint winners. Firstly, prepare the game deck. Sort the cards onto the first, second and third decade cards using the description at the bottom of each card. Set aside the cards from the second and from the third decade and shuffle all the cards from the first decade, creating the game deck which will be used in the first part of the game. Each player chooses one of the 4 available factions and takes the corresponding player's board. This board has a game summary. It has also a list concerning how to spend operation points and how to exchange cards with the leftover pile. On the right side, it indicates all the objectives cards of your opponents. On the left side, it has an initial deployment section and lists all the orbit countries, as well as indicates what is the scoring order. The board explains also what are the different kind of countries and what are the bonuses for coup d'etats. Place your veto markers on your board, 3 of them, and if you're playing the USA and Russia, place the 4th additional veto marker. Place also the coup marker on the corresponding spot, in this case on number 3. Now prepare the game board, open it and place it on the center of the table. Place the game turn marker on the space 1 of the turn track. The turn track is divided into 3 decades, each composed of 3 turns. Place the media marker in the 0 space of the media track. This marker will be moved left or right during the game, depending on different effects. Prepare the access restriction markers, 4 for China, 5 for the European Union. Place the markers on the open padlock spaces below the boxes in the corresponding regions. The list of the places where you should place all the markers is on page 12 of the rulebook. If you have any doubts about the abbreviations used here, refer to page 47, where all the abbreviations used in the rulebook are explained. Place each power's victory point marker in the 20th space of the victory point track. The markers are double-sided, so whenever a player scores more than 100 points, flip the marker over. Each power's prestige marker is placed in the box with its flag on the prestige track. Each player's initial prestige is different. Place all the subregion markers in their indicated spaces with the name of the subregion face up, 13 in total. Each player takes their corresponding control markers, their media reserve marker and their OP reserve markers. These 2 will be used a little bit later. Each player takes their own objective cards deck, shuffles it, and then draws 3 cards from the top of it. He looks at those cards, chooses 2 of them to keep, and 1 of them to be removed entirely from the game. This card will not be used. The remaining 2 will be the initial objectives of the player. Each player performs their initial deployment. Starting by the USA, followed by the European Union, then by China and finally by Russia, each player chooses one of their 2 available initial deployment options printed on their player's board. Mind that China doesn't have 2 options, they have only 1 deployment strategy. Place the corresponding control markers on the chosen countries, depending on the chosen option. Set aside all the remaining components, the victory point modifier markers, the permanent event markers and the stability tokens in both colors. The red color will be used by the China-Russia bloc and the blue tokens will be used by the USA and European Union bloc. Congratulations! Now the game is set. You are ready to start playing. Let's now take a look at the sequence of play. A game of New Cold War can take up to 9 turns. Each of those turns will be played in accordance with the game turn structure. The first phase during each turn will consist in dealing cards. The second one, the initial phase, will be the one during which you will be drawing new objectives, exchanging cards between players, exchanging cards with the leftover pile, and resetting available coup tracks. The third phase, the action phase, is the heart of the game. During this phase, each player will play exactly 3 cards in 3 successive rounds of play. The last phase is the turn end phase, during which you will be placing the remaining card on the leftover pile, doing prestige checks and scoring. Let's now take a look at all those phases and see how they work. The first phase is an extremely short one. During this phase, each player should receive exactly 4 cards from the top of the event card deck. Remember that at the beginning of the game, the deck of event cards should be composed only of cards with the indication that these are first decade cards. The first part of the initial phase is the objective card draw. Mind that this is done only at the start of turn 1 and at the start of turn 5, which is indicated on the game turn track. Remember that you already drew the 3 first initial objective cards and you kept 2 of them, so do not draw any more during turn 1. But at the beginning of turn 5, draw 1 additional card from your objective deck. This card will be added to the ones that you already have. After potentially drawing a new objective card, players exchange cards. This is done at the beginning of turns 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 and 8, as indicated on the game turn track. Players of the Allied powers, which means USA and the European Union, Russia and China, have to exchange one of their cards that they have in their hand with their Allied player. They can pick freely one of the 4 cards that they have, but they cannot choose crisis cards. They have to choose something else. Now, this is a good moment to explain what are the type of cards that are used during a game of New Cold War. At first, let's take a look at all the different elements which can be found on an event card. The first thing is a flag. The flag displayed on the card indicates with which power the card is associated. It can be Chinese, European, Russian or American, or it can display no flag. In this last case, this will be a neutral card. The second information is the card's name. The card's name is important because sometimes other cards can refer to it. The third element are operation points, either 1 digit or 2. This is the number of operation points, ranging from 0 to 4, that the player executing the card will be granted. War cards always have 2 digits, whereas other kinds of cards can have 2 digits when it comes to some negative cards, but in general you will find only 1 number on each card. The next part is the event part. This can consist of only a description indicating how the card can be resolved when played as an event. It can also have a set of additional icons indicating additional effects. Uniqueness indicates if the card can be played multiple times, or is it a card which should be discarded after play. If a card has this specific icon, it indicates that after being played, it should be removed from the game entirely, whether being played as an event or for operation points. Non-unique events depend on the decade they are played in. In case of first and second decade cards, the cards will be played on the discard pile after being played, whereas during the third decade, such a card will be entirely removed from the game after being played. The card also indicates the decade during which the event took place, first, second, third. Each card has also its specific number, which identifies the card, and it's used for referencing and organizing the deck. The event cards which are part of New Cold War can be basically divided into 4 types. The first are standard event cards, which can be used either for their operation points or for their event. The second kind are negative cards, which are denoted by having an OPS value greater than 0, but with a black background. Some of them also have a second lower OPS value on a gray background. With negative events cards, there is no choice on how to play them. We always play them for operation points. The third kind of cards are crisis cards. Crisis cards represent the most damaging historical events for each power, and they are denoted by having a 0 OPS value on a black background. They cannot be exchanged, they cannot be discarded or vetoed, which is always indicated on the card itself. Finally, we have also war cards, which are differentiated by having the war symbol on them, and they can be played either as the event or for operation points, but it depends which side plays them. It depends if you're playing your own card or if you're playing an opponent's card. War cards, which are played by the owning faction, can be played either for operation points or for their event. To play the card as an event and initiate the war, the country referred to by the card must be controlled by an opponent or be uncontrolled. If the player already controls the country referred to by the card, the event cannot be played and the operation points must be used instead. When played for its operation points, we use, rather than the event, the higher value printed on the card is used. If a war card is played by another faction, which is not denoted on the card, it must be determined if the event is going to be executed or not in order to know how many operation points it will be played. This depends on the status of the country referred to by the card. If the country is controlled by an opponent of the power associated with the card, or is uncontrolled, the war will take place, and the higher operation points value of the card will be used to compensate the player for using a card which benefits their opponent. But if the power associated with the card shown by the flag already controls the country affected by the war will not be taking place, and the lower operation points value will be used since an opponent is not benefiting from the war card. Some negative cards also have two digits printed on them. The first value, the higher value, will be used in cases where the card is being played by the faction owning the card. If this is the case, the event is resolved and the owning faction receives the higher number of operation points to compensate the fact of having played a negative event. If the card is being played by another faction, this faction will use only the smaller number of operation points because no compensation has to be granted. Finally, we have also the neutral cards with no flag printed on them and with a grey background. These cards can be played both for operation points as well as for their event. It's the playing side who decides. Now that we know what are the types of event cards used in the game, let's return to the sequence of play. After exchanging cards, but only on turns 1, 2, 4, 5, 7 and 8, there is a possibility of exchanging cards with the leftover pile. This possibility happens on turns 3, 6 and 9, again as it is indicated on the turn sequence track. To explain how such an exchange with the leftover pile takes place, we have to firstly understand how the cards in New Cold War circulate. Firstly, we have the deck of cards, which is constructed at the beginning of the game and then reconstructed at the end of each decade. Secondly, we have the discard pile, where cards will be placed after being played if they do not have the trash icon on them. If a card has a trash icon, it will be instantly removed from the game and it will not be used. At the end of each action phase, when players already played 3 cards, the remaining 4th card is placed on a separate pile called the leftover pile. At the beginning of turns 3, 6 and 9, players who are back in victory points can exchange a certain number of cards from their hand with the leftover pile. They firstly receive the 4 cards for the round, then they examine those cards and they can decide to exchange their cards for cards coming from the leftover pile. In order to do so, they can examine all the cards which are part of the leftover pile, and they can take those cards into their hand and replace those cards by discarding one of their cards from the game. This card is placed into the discard pile, so it will not be drafted or taken from the leftover pile by any other player. Remember also that crisis cards cannot be exchanged. They cannot be put onto the leftover pile, they have to be played during your turn. They cannot also be discarded in order to take a card from the leftover pile. The exact number of cards which can be exchanged with the leftover pile depends on the number of players playing and on the turn played. The exact number is explained in the rulebook on page 6, as well as on the bottom central part of each player's board. Finally, the last part of the initial phase, regardless of the turn being played, is the reset of the available coups of each faction. Their counter is placed once more on the third space on their available coup per turn track. The action phase is the heart of the game. This is the moment when players will be using the cards that they have in their hand in order to execute different types of actions. Each player will have to play 3 cards of the 4 that they have, and mind that if a player has among those 4 cards a crisis card, he has to play it. He cannot leave it in the leftover pile, and he has to play it during one of his 3 rounds. Each player, at the start of each round, chooses one of their available cards and places it in the center of the playing board onto the negotiating table. The card is placed always face down in the position indicated by the dotted line, without determining at this point whether the card will be played for its event or for its operation points. Once all players have placed their card, they will simultaneously place it in the corresponding box, event or operation points, and then turn it face up. Cards are always resolved in a very specific order. Firstly, it is determined if cards were played for their event or for the operation points. It's always the cards which were played for events which are resolved first. Firstly, if there are any crisis cards, then they are resolved first. If more than one crisis was played, then the tiebreaker rule decides who plays first. I will refer to the tiebreaker rule in a few moments. Secondly, after resolving all crisis cards, if there are 2 or more event cards in play, they are played from highest to lowest according to their operational points value. If the cards have the same operational points value, the order of play is determined again according to the tiebreaker rule. When playing a negative or war card, the higher operation points value of the card is used to establish the order of play, even if the power playing the card will have to use the lower operational points value. If an operational point reserve marker is placed on the card, I will refer to it a little bit later, it will be added to the card's value and taken into account to determine the order of play. If the card is played for operation points, again, the order in which the cards will be resolved depends on the value of the cards played. The cards will be played from highest to lowest. If a card has multiple values printed on it, it's the highest value on the card which will determine what is the real value of the card. If multiple cards have the same value, they will be resolved using the tiebreaker rule. Whenever there is a tie, in determining the order of play or in any other situation requiring a tiebreaker, a very specific tiebreaker is used to resolve this. Firstly, it's the power of the higher victory point score that takes precedence. In case of a tie, it's the prestige score. In case of a tie, it's the media score, if both the victory points and prestige scores are tied. Finally, if neither of these tiebreakers can be applied, it's the initial turn order which decides. The initial turn order is indicated on the prestige track. It's printed on it using the flags of each power. The way how a card can be used depends on the faction which is printed on the card. If you have your own powers card or a neutral card, then you can choose to play the card either for its event or for its operation points. Only one of those 2 solutions will be applied. But if you have a negative event or a card associated to another faction, then you do not have any choice. You have to play the card for operation points, use those operation points, and then, after doing so, the event will be resolved. When a card is played for its operation points, players have access to 6 actions that they can spend these points on. They can use points in order to execute multiple actions. Now, let's take a look at how they work. The first available action is placing or removing control. In order to explain how this works, we should firstly explain what are the types of countries which are present on the board. The board is divided into regions, and in each region we have a certain number of countries. These can be of 3 different types. The first one, and the most important one, are the regional powers. We have 5 regional powers on the board: India, Japan, Brazil, Mexico and South Africa. Those are the countries which exercise leadership in their corresponding regions. Controlling of a regional power is worth 3 victory points. The second type of country is a geostrategic country. Those are the ones which are important but in a very limited geographical region. Those are worth 2 points when it comes to scoring. Finally, we have other kind of countries which do not have a high geostrategic impact. Controlling such countries is only worth 1 victory point during scoring. Placing or removing control markers on the board requires spending a certain amount of operation points depending on the stability number of the country in which we want to place or from which we want to remove the marker. In some cases, we have 2 numbers printed, indicating that such a country is a so-called orbit country, aligned to a very specific faction at the beginning of the game. Placing or removing markers from this specific country will be cheaper or higher, depending on the block that you are aligned to. If you are aligned to the same block to which the country was aligned at the beginning of the game, placing the counters or removing the counters will be cheaper. But if you are aligned to the opposing block, the cost will be higher. If during a single turn we want to replace an opponent's control marker in a given country, we have to spend the full number of operation points required. Firstly, we will have to spend the points required to remove the opposing block's control marker, and then to place our own, again spending the same amount of operation points. The placement of control markers can be limited depending on the power which is trying to place this marker. Russia and the USA have initially access to all regions from the start of the game, and they are not limited by any regional restraints. China, at the beginning of the game, has access only to Asia and to Southeast Asia, whereas the European Union has access to Europe and Africa. These initial restrictions are indicated by placing closed padlock tokens for the corresponding decade on the board. Those padlocks can be removed through the play of certain cards. Additionally, some padlocks will be removed at the end of specific turns, and this will allow China and Europe to access different regions. The only exception is Europe, which will remain unavailable for China for the entire game. Placing and removing control markers from the board serves several purposes. Firstly, it can grant you victory points during global scoring phases. Note that when placing counters on the board or removing your opponent's counters from the board, you do not immediately score any points. The number of victory points scored during each global scoring phase depends on the type of country controlled, and it varies from 3 for regional powers to 1 for non-geostrategic countries. The second purpose is to control subregions. Subregions are part of the board, which are indicated by a specific tile, indicating also the number of points which can be gained by each of the factions if they happen to control such a subregion at the end of any turn. Finally, you can also control the whole region. In such a case, controlling the minimum number of countries in a region and having more victory points in that region than any other rival grants you control of that region, and this will provide you additional victory points during global scoring phases in turns 3, 6 and 9. Regional control is also sometimes the condition of achieving certain objectives. The second available type of action is a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat happens when a power changes the control of a country from an opponent's control to its own control, using the operation points from the same card. Coup d'etats can be carried out in all countries with a stability of 1 or 2, or in orbit countries which were destabilized. In such a case, it is possible to perform coup d'etats in those places. Coup d'etats cannot take place in countries with a stability of 3 or 4, even if they are destabilized. When performing a coup d'etat in a country of the opposing bloc, the higher stability rating is only applied when moving the first position, which means that in order to remove the control marker of the opposing bloc, you do have to pay the higher number, but then to place your own control marker, you only have to spend the lower value, which is an additional bonus when performing coup d'etats. Note that if you were to change this state by firstly removing and then placing the control marker in 2 separate card plays, this would require each time to play the higher number. Performing coup d'etats may grant you instant rewards or cause immediate penalties for your opponent. These rewards and penalties will not be granted during global scoring phase, but they will be applied immediately. All those rewards and penalties are described on your player's board. Additionally, after performing a coup d'etat, you have to move your coup d'etat marker on your player's board in order to indicate the number of coup d'etats that you can perform during this turn. The third available action is to place or remove stability tokens. Stability tokens come in blue and red, as their effects are shared by the 2 powers that form each allied bloc. The red tokens favor Russia and China, whereas the blue tokens favor the US and the EU. Each country can contain only 1 stability token at a time, and there cannot be 2 tokens from the same bloc or tokens from both blocks placed on a single country. The cost of placing a stability token is always 1 operation point. They can be used in 2 ways. Firstly, to stabilize a country, and secondly, to destabilize a country. In both scenarios, the counters will be placed in accordance to the color of the bloc that your country is aligned to. Stabilizing a country means doing one of 3 things. Firstly, you can place a stability token onto an allied controlled country in order to make it more resilient to enemy attacks. Secondly, you can remove a stability token of the opposing bloc in order to make your country more resilient to any future tries to destabilize it and to change its alignment. Finally, you can also remove an opposing bloc stability token from an uncontrolled country. All those actions cost just 1 operation point from the card that you played. To destabilize a country, again you will be having 3 options. Firstly, you can place one of your stability tokens onto an enemy-controlled country in order to make it more easy to be influenced. Secondly, you can also remove an opponent's stability token from a country which was already stabilized by the opposing bloc. Finally, you can also add one of your counters onto an uncontrolled country in order to destabilize it and in order to make it more easy to control. The presence of stability markers on the board causes the increase in operation points for a power from the opposing bloc to move that country 1 position. Additionally, it also reduces the cost for a power from the same bloc to move the country 1 position. A token remains on the board until a moment when a power makes a move that involves applying the +1 or -1 operation point. At this moment, such a stability marker is removed. There are 2 additional important rules related to stability tokens which have to be remembered. Firstly, in countries with stability 1, it is impossible to place any stability tokens. Those cannot be destabilized. Secondly, it is not possible to control a country and then to stabilize it with points from the same card. You cannot do it during 1 movement. The 4th available action is related to the prestige track. By paying a certain amount of operation points, players can move their token on this track by moving to the right side of it. At the beginning of the game, each player's token is placed on the corresponding space indicated by their flag. During the game, if their counter is in the central space of the track from -3 to +3, by spending 2 operation points, such a country can move their marker by 1 space to the right. If their marker is currently on the +4, +5 or -4, -5 space, such a movement requires spending 3 operation points. If during the game a marker is on the far right or far left of the track and their token is supposed to be moved to the right or to the left, such a side instantly receives +2 points or loses 2 victory points. The position of the markers on the prestige track will be important at the end of turns 2, 5 and 8 when prestige checks are made. The fifth and penultimate action is related to the media track. The media track is located just below the prestige track on the main board. The track indicates to which block the medias are currently aligned. It can advance to the red part of the track where it is favoring Russia and China, or it can be influencing, or it can be favorable to the USA and to the European Union. Any country can move this marker to preferably its own side by paying 2 operation points. A side can also decide to place a reserve media token from his own reserve by paying 1 operation point. This will enable the token to be moved as soon as the second country from the same block also spends 1 operation point. At this time, the media reserve token is removed and the media token is moved to the side of the corresponding block. The position of the media marker will be important in different moments of the game, especially during checks done during prestige checks and also during global scoring phases. First, let's check how the position of the media marker influences prestige checks. During prestige checks in turns 2, 5 and 8, we verify where the media marker is placed on the media track. The position indicates if any country receives an additional virtual shift on the prestige track. If the marker is on spaces +1 to 3 of a given side of the track, each country of the same block receives a virtual shift by 1 position to the corresponding direction. If the marker is on the places 4 or 5, such a virtual shift would be done by 2 spaces. Note that the tokens on the prestige track are not physically moved. This is only a virtual shift which should be taken into consideration during the prestige check. The place where the media marker is present is also important during global scoring phases. Depending on the place where such a media marker starts this phase, each country of the corresponding block will receive a certain benefit. Those benefits are described on the media track as well as in the rulebook on page 19. The last available action enables a player to create an operational point reserve. You can pay 1 operation point to place the corresponding operation point reserve onto the playing board in its holding box on the negotiating center. Such a point can be used later in future rounds or turns, but with the condition that it cannot be kept across a change of decade. When a player decides to use such a point, it is placed on top of the card that such a player intends to play during his turn. If this card is then played as an event, the player executes the event and then can also use 1 operation point for any action, or if it is a card played for operations, this increases the value of the card by 1, but to a maximum of 4. In such a case, such a card will have a value equal to the printed number on it plus 1 coming from the reserve. During an execution of a card which was boosted by an additional operation point coming from reserve, players cannot create a new reserve, so they will have to do it in a future play. During the game, each power will have also the right to veto certain events that they consider too advantageous for the rivals, or maybe too detrimental to their own power. When exercising the right to veto, only the event is prevented from being executed, never the operation points associated with the card. That means if a card has been played for its operation points and it gets vetoed, the event will not trigger, but the player can still spend the operation points to conduct actions. However, if a card has been played for its event and gets vetoed, the player will be unable to play during his round. Each power has 3 veto markers, and the United States of America and Russia have one additional, which can be used only during the first decade. Each veto marker can be used in order to veto a card of a specific operation points value. Cards which cost 1 operation point can be vetoed by any marker, but cards which cost 2 operation points can be vetoed only by the second and third marker, whereas the strongest card costing 3 operation points can be vetoed only by the last marker, unless this is a card played during the first decade, when the USA and Russia can use also their specific markers to veto such a card. When vetoing a card, we have also to remember that this is something which causes a player to vetoing such a card to lose points, depending on the marker used. Here it's also possible to veto a card of a lower value with a higher token, but the cost in victory points will still be dependent on the number printed on the used counter. It is impossible to veto crisis cards. Cards with a value of 4 also cannot never be voted. The first step of the turn end phase consists in placing all the remaining cards on the leftover pile, on turns 1 to 8. Each player, after having played 3 cards of the 4 that they had in their hand, places the remaining 1 card on the leftover pile. During turns 2, 5 and 8, there is a prestige check which is made instantly after discarding the cards to the leftover pile. Firstly, players check the place of the media marker on the media track and apply a virtual shift to all the powers on the prestige track. Then players score the prize or get a penalty depending on the place where the prestige marker is present on the track. Those additional benefits can be victory points, can also be additional reserve markers or negative reserve markers, or they can be negative victory points as penalties. If a single power is leading on the prestige track, it also receives an additional bonus of +3 victory points. In turns 3, 6 and 9, so at the end of each decade, we pass to a global scoring phase. During the global scoring phase, the players will firstly consult the media track once again in order to determine which block will receive a certain additional benefit related to the position of the media marker on the track. After applying this benefit, we pass to the scoring subphase, when players will score points for each of the regions present on the map, starting by Europe, then in the Middle East, Central America, South America, Africa, Asia, and finally finishing in Southeast Asia. In each region, scoring will be started by the player who is ahead in the victory point score and will continue in order. Each player adds up the points of each country they control in the region according to its geopolitical importance. Regional powers, such as South Africa, grant 3 victory points. Geostrategic countries, such as Congo, grants 2 victory points, whereas non-geostrategical countries grant 1 victory point. Additional victory points can be attributed to powers who control an orbit country of the opposing bloc, for instance, if Russia controls Morocco in this specific scenario. After scoring victory points for countries, we should determine if any player controls the region. Each region specifies the number of countries that should be controlled by a power in order to control the region. In this specific example, in order to control Africa, a power should control not less than 9 countries in the region. In this specific example, Russia controls 9 countries in total. But the second condition, which should be also met in order to obtain the points for controlling the region, is to have more victory points than each of the individual rivals of a specific power. In this scenario, Russia has 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 points, whereas the USA has 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 points. So there is a tie, which means that no country controls the region. If the USA had 1 point less, Russia would have not only control over 9 countries in the region, they would also have more victory points in the region, which would mean that Russia would also receive 5 additional victory points for the control of this specific region. Regardless of the turn being played, after potentially verifying the prestige and after potentially also doing a global scoring, we pass on to verifying the subregion control. As mentioned earlier, regions are also encompassing subregions. Each subregion is composed of a certain number of countries, and each subregion has an additional scoring tile. If at the end of any turn a single power controls all the countries which make up the subregion, such a power can claim the victory points printed on the tile of the corresponding subregion. The points are added to the score of the power, and the tile is flipped over in order to indicate that no other power will be able to claim those points during the game. Finally, the last thing which is done during the turn end phase is to score objectives. Each power can verify if they manage to achieve any of the objectives that they have in their hand. If they do, they can score 1 and only 1 of those objectives, gaining the points associated to the card, and placing their objective card next to their playing area. If a power already scored an objective in one of their earlier turns, and if they manage to score 1 additional during turns 2 to 8, they instantly win the game. During turn 9, it is impossible to obtain automatic victory even if a superpower scores their second objective. But still, the points granted by such an objective are added to the score of the power who managed to achieve such an objective. Having scored any potential objectives, the turn ends, and we pass to the next one. If this was the end of turn 3 or 6, before starting the next turn, we should also take care of the playing deck, because at the beginning of turn 4 and 7, new cards will be added to the deck. The second decade deck should be added and shuffled along with the following cards. Any cards that weren't dealt to players from the first decade deck and the cards from the discard pile. The leftover pile from game turns 1-2 is also shuffled in, but not the leftover cards from game turn 3, which are instead used to build the new leftover pile. They remain there until the next exchange at the beginning of turn 6. At the beginning of turn 7, the third deck decade should be added and shuffled along with the following cards. Any cards that weren't dealt to players from the current deck, which may contain cards from the first and second decade, and the cards from the discard pile. The leftover pile from the game turns 3-5 is also shuffled in, but not the leftover cards from game turn 6, which are instead used to build the new leftover pile. They remain there until the next exchange at the beginning of turn 9. These are basically all the rules that you need to start playing New Cold War. Note that if you play a game with less than 4 players, so a solo game, a 2 players game or a 3 players game, you should apply some additional rules which are described in the rulebook starting from page 25. In such cases, bots will be also present in the game and some additional rules should be applied. But when you play a 4 players game, the previous explanations should be sufficient in order to play. This is the end of this how to play video, during which I presented you how works New Cold War from Vuca Simulations. If after watching this video you still have some questions about how the game works, feel free to write those questions in the comments. Feel free also to point out any mistakes or any additional feedback that you would like to share with me. I really appreciate every kind word and every feedback that you will have after watching this video. I hope that you will enjoy both New Cold War as any of my further videos related to wargames or to any other board games which I am presenting on my channel. This was a tutorial of New Cold War published by Vuca Simulations. Thank you very much for watching this video. I invite you also to take a look at my other videos. Take also a look at my Facebook, Instagram and Twitter accounts. Have a terrific day. See you next time.